Here's RFK Jr. at a hearing about censorship. The Democrats have multiple times tried to censor him. They tried to get the whole censorship hearing put private. The irony of that is lost on the Democrats. They all signed, 100 of them signed a letter saying that RFK Jr. shouldn't be allowed to testify. They are like the worst kind of communist dictator. When I was growing up, I always thought that communist dictators did stuff like this. The Democratic Party does it right on camera. Yeah. They don't care. And so now RFK Jr. is actually going to respond. This is his opening statement. But he was maligned. They called him anti-Semitic. They keep calling him. The guy couldn't be a bigger simp for Israel. My problem with RFK Jr. is the way he defends Israel.
Right.
But they now try to make him anti-Semitic. Of course, if he's a white supremacist, misogynist, and now he's an anti-Semite. That's the game. Okay, here we go.
Statement for a moment and address one of the points that was brought up. I think an important point by the ranking member, that this body ought to be concerning itself with the issues that impact directly the American people. The rising price of groceries, 76% over the past 2 years for basic food stuff.
So Stacey Plaskett, that woman we just showed you in the other clip, the ranking member of this committee, she's a non-voting member, Democrat from the Virgin Islands. She said, why are we having this censorship committee when we should be talking about real things like the price of groceries and gasoline?
Oh, is that what they were going to talk about?
And so what he says is really on point to that.
The war in Ukraine, the inflation issues, the border issues, many, many other issues that concern us all as a nation. We can't do that without the First Amendment, without debate.
You can't talk about anything without the First Amendment, without open debate, without freedom of speech. You can't talk about the war, the border crisis, inflation, and anything, abortion, COVID, vaccine. You can't talk about anything without the First Amendment and free speech. That's why this hearing's super important. So he's making her look like a fool, and it's easy to do, and he's doing it.
When I gave my speech, my announcement speech in Boston 2 months ago, YouTube, I talked about all those issues. I focused on grocery. I focused on the fact that working class people can no longer afford to live in this country. I talked about inflation, all the issues that deeply concern you, and that you've devoted your career to alleviating those issues. 5 minutes into my speech, when I was talking about Paul Revere, YouTube deplatformed me. I didn't talk about vaccines in that speech. I didn't talk about anything that was a verboten subject. I just was talking about my campaign and things, the conversation that we ought to be having with each other as Americans. But I was shut down, and that is why the First Amendment's important. Debate, congenial, respectful debate, is the fertilizer, it's the water, it's the sunlight for our democracy. We need to be talking to each other. Now, this is a letter that many of you signed, many of my fellow Democrats. I've spent my life in this party. I've devoted my life to the values of this party. There's 102 people signed this. This itself is evidence of the problem that this hearing was convened to address.
That letter is 100 Democrats that don't want him to be allowed to speak.
What does it say?
It says, don't let him speak. And so that's what he's referring to. Okay.
This is an attempt to censor a censorship hearing. The charges in this, and by the way, censorship is antithetical to our party. It was appalling to my father.
Yeah, not anymore, RFK. You're saying censorship used to be antithetical to my party, to my father, my uncle. Not anymore. They're the party of censorship.
Gangrene spreads, you know?
Yep.
Uncle, to FDR, to Harry Truman, to Thomas Jefferson, as the chairman referred to. It is the basis for democracy. It sets us apart from all of the previous forms of government. We need to be able to talk, and the First Amendment was not written for easy speech. It was written for the speech that nobody likes you for. And I was censored not just by the Democratic administration. I was censored by the Trump administration. I was the first person censored by as the chairman pointed out, by the Biden administration 2 days after it came into office. It ordered a truthful, and by the way, They had to invent a new word called malinformation to censor people like me. There was no misinformation on my Instagram account. Everything I put on that account was cited and sourced to peer-reviewed publications or government databases. Nobody has ever pointed to a single piece of misinformation that I published. I was removed for something they called malinformation. Malinformation is information that is true, but is inconvenient to the government, that they don't want people to hear. And that's antithetical to the values of our country. After I announced my presidency, it became more difficult for people to censor me outright. So now I'm subject to this new form of censorship, which is called targeted propaganda, where people apply pejoratives like anti-vax. I've never been anti-vaccine, but everybody in this room probably believes that I have been, because that's the prevailing narrative. Anti-Semitism, racism. These are the most appalling, disgusting pejoratives, and they're applied to me to silence me, because people don't want me to have that conversation about the war, about groceries, about inflation, about the war on the middle class in this country that we need to be having. And by the way, I want to say this while I'm on the record, that in my entire life, and why I'm under oath, in my entire life, I have never uttered a phrase that was either racist or anti-Semitic. I have spent my life fighting my professional career, fighting for Israel, for the protection of Israel. I have a better record on Israel than anybody in this chamber today. I'm the only person who has publicly objected to the $2 billion payout that the Biden administration is now making to Iran, which is a genocidal program. I'm the only one who's objected to that. I fought more ferociously for Israel than anybody. But I am being censored here through this target, through smears, through misinterpretations of what I've said, through lies, through association, which is a tactic that we all thought we had been discredited and dispensed with after the Army McCarthy hearings in the 1950s. But those same weapons are now being deployed against me to silence me. I know many of the people who wrote this letter. I don't believe there's a single person who signed this letter who believes I'm anti-Semitic. I do not believe that. There is no evidence of that. Now, I want to say something I think that's more important, and it goes directly to what you talked about, ranking member, which is the need, this toxic polarization that is destroying our country today. And how do we deal with that? This kind of division is more dangerous for our country than any time since the American Civil War. And how do we deal with that? How are we going to, every Democrat on this committee believes that we need to end that polarization. Do you think you can do that by censoring people? I'm telling you, you cannot. That only aggravates and amplifies the problem. We need to start being kind to each other. We need to start being respectful to each other. We need to start restoring the comedy to this chamber and to the rest of America, but it has to start here. My uncle, Edward Kennedy, has more legislation with his name on it than any senator in United States history. Why is that? Because he was able to reach across the aisle, because he didn't deal in insults, because he didn't try to censor people. He brought home people who were antithetical to what he believed in. He came home almost every weekend with people like Orrin Hatch to our house at the compound in Hyannisport. At that time, Orrin Hatch to me was like Darth Vader, because I was an environmentalist. And I was saying, why is Teddy bringing this guy home? But he knew that he was effective because he understood that comedy and respect and kindness and compassion and empathy for other people is the only way to restore the function in this chamber. But more importantly, today, we need to give an example in the leadership of our country of being respectful to each other. If you think I said something that's anti-Semitic, let's talk about the details. I'm telling you, all the things that I'm accused of right now by you, and in this letter are distortions, they're misrepresentations. I didn't say those things. There's fragments that I said, but I denounce anybody who uses the words that I have said to imply something that is negative about people who are Jewish. I never said those things. And I want to point out also that the chairman pointed to Dennis Kucinich, who's fighting behind me. There is no two people in the country who feel more differently about American politics than these two people. And yet they were friends. Dennis attended his children's basketball games, attended his daughter's wedding. This is what we need, how we need to start treating each other in this country. We have to stop trying to destroy each other, to marginalize, to vilify, to gaslight each other. We have to find that place inside of ourselves of light, of empathy, of compassion, and above all, we need to elevate the Constitution of the United States, which was written for hard times. And that has to be the premier compass for all of our activities. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to raise a point of order.
Young lady, say a point of order.
Point of order pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2.
Yeah, so that was when that was right after his opening statement. She wanted to shut it down.
He sounds like Hitler.
So that's his opening speech. There's your Democratic Party. He's trying to, I guess, change the Democratic Party completely because the Democratic Party is horrible.
I mean, his response is pretty great, I must say. That was a good speech.
That's a great speech. He has one. I have one more clip of him speaking here. I forget what this is. Let's play it.
The what I would call defamations that have been just applied to me by the ranking member.
Oh, okay, so that ranking member, Stacey Plaskett, she kept calling him all these names and saying he's anti-vax and he's anti-Semitic and all this stuff. And so what?
Somebody just got donations from Epstein. I mean, just the balls.
Yeah. So a woman who took money from Epstein after he was convicted is trying to disparage and discredit RFK Jr. And he comes back at her like this.
I'm happy to talk to you about my opinions on these issues. What you have stated and tried to associate me with through guilt by association is simply inaccurate. Virtually everything, every statement that you just made about me is inaccurate. I have never advised Black Americans not to receive vaccines. At one point you say I'm anti-vax, and that's a bad thing. The other moment you point out that all my children are vax. I'm fully compliant with the vaccine schedule myself, except for COVID. I took flu vaccines for 20 years straight. I have never been anti-vax. I have never told the public avoid vaccination. You tried to associate me a moment ago with the replacement theory, which is racist.
No, I did not say you.
Time belongs to the gentleman.
I said my colleagues.
The time belongs to the gentleman.
I denounce that theory. It is racist, and I have never endorsed it or had any association with it. Our film on a medical, by the way, Bill Buxton, who is the Black CDC official who ultimately exposed the Tuskegee experiment, tried for years and years to appeal to CDC to stop it for 40 years. Finally, he got relief by walking into my uncle's office in the building next door. He held hearings and ended the experiment.
He's talking about the Tuskegee experiment where they were, didn't they give Black people syphilis?
No, they already, here's what people came in with syphilis.
Yeah.
It's not that they gave them syphilis, but it's just as evil. People who had syphilis.
They didn't treat them.
They didn't tell them didn't treat them because they wanted to see what it would do.
They wanted to see what it would do to them.
For 40 years.
Yeah. And the CDC knew about it. And it didn't end until a whistleblower of the CDC went to Ted Kennedy's office. Was it Ted Kennedy or John Kennedy? Maybe John Kennedy.
I thought you said Ted, but
I remember that very well. And to say that I created a film that encourages Blacks not to get adequate medical care is just completely abhorrent.
Don't misuse my words.
It's the witness's time. Do not censor the witness.
I'm not censoring the witness. I'm not censoring the witness. He's still talking.
It's my time, and I've given it to the witness. Do not censor him.
I'm not censoring him.
If the views that you and others have applied to me, I've attributed to me, if they were actually true, I can see why I shouldn't be able to testify here today. Those are not true. These are defamations and malignancies that are used to censor me, to prevent people from listening to the actual things that I'm saying. And I think, ranking member, that we should have a real conversation rather than an exchange of ad hominem attacks.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. You're not going to ever have a real exchange with a Democrat on that committee. Those people are liars. They're murderous. They're
People
war pigs.
Who get money from Epstein.
They take money from Epstein. They take money from the Big Pharma, military industrial, from murderer. They're the worst people in the world that you're dealing with. But he, RFK Jr., good for him. I'm going to show you one more thing from RFK where Debbie Wasserman Schultz went after him.
These people think that, I mean, I guess he's right. They don't really think what they're saying, but the way they portray it, Hunter Biden is a more honorable person than RFK Jr. in the world of...
Say it again?
The way they would portray it, Hunter Biden is a more honorable, who should get more leeway. Yes,
we should have compassion for Hunter Biden. But
RFK Jr.
is dangerous and should be anti-Semite, should be censored. Come see our live shows. We're going to be in Chicago, Rosemont, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, New York City, Pottstown, Pennsylvania, Stamford, Toronto, Toledo, Detroit, St. Louis, and more. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for those tickets.